China is situated on the eastern third of the Eurasian landmass, between Russia, mainland Southeast Asia, the Indian subcontinent and Central Asia. Its more than 9,000-mile-long coastline abuts the Yellow, East and South China Seas. China is a country of deep geographic divisions. Most fundamental is the split between its fertile eastern lowlands and the arid, sparsely populated highlands that enclose the lowlands like a shell. More than 1 billion people live in the ethnic Han Chinese core, making it one of the most densely populated places on Earth. Traditionally, threats to China's Han core originated in the borderlands. To guard against overland invasion, successive Chinese rulers have sought to push the core's borders outward, integrating these highlands as strategic buffer zones. These zones form a shield, protecting and containing the core. To be secure, China must control the buffer regions. But maintaining control of the regions, in turn, requires a strong and united core. And that means overcoming immense internal divisions not only between northern and southern regions orbiting the Yellow and Yangtze rivers, but also between smaller regional units, each with their own geography, history, dialect and interests. Chinese history is defined by cycles of unity and fragmentation, from periods when a strong Han core captures and holds the surrounding buffers to those when a weak core breaks into its constituent parts, loses internal coherence and cedes control of the borderlands. This pattern, rooted in China's geography, has played out with remarkable consistency. By comparison, China's maritime interests have remained mostly limited to coastal waters. Today, however, growing international trade and rising Chinese reliance on overseas resources threaten to alter the pattern, adding a new maritime dimension to the struggle for buffer space and potentially upending the long-standing dynamics of China's geographic challenge. India is endowed with favorable geographic barriers. Surrounded by oceans on 3 sides and the formidable Himalayan mountains to the north, what is now modern India has been free of outside interference for much of its long history. Its large geographic size and population, coupled with weaker peripheral nations on much of its boundaries, have allowed India to become the dominant force in South Asia. Home to the world's second-largest population, India's 1.3 billion people are spread out across the peninsular nation, from the foothills of the Himalayas to the tropical south. India's population core is settled along the Ganges River basin, a densely populated swath of fertile land that extends across the northern Himalayan border. India's primary geographic challenge comes from a lack of strong internal boundaries. Modern-day India struggles to rectify the ambitions of a relatively weak national government that competes with the prerogatives of strong, diverse states, a legacy of a long history of domestic infighting between various dynasties uninhibited by mountains or other defining geography. A similar lack of defining geography still plagues India's northwest border. Waves of Greek, Persian, and Mongols invaded, culminating in the Mughal Empire, which united much of the subcontinent prior to British conquest. The northwestern border still poses national security risks due to ongoing disputes with Pakistan. But rising domestic consumption means India is increasingly dependent on imported goods from distant suppliers. Surrounded by water or impassable mountains, New Delhi now faces the additional task of developing naval capabilities to secure its critical supply routes, risking maritime tensions with China in the broader Indo-Pacific basin. As the United States and its NATO allies accelerate their final withdrawal from Afghanistan, the Taliban have retaken swathes of the country amid fears of a government collapse. The U.S. is by no means the first superpower to get bogged down in chaos and violence before eventually withdrawing from a country that has been dubbed the graveyard of empires for good reason. The British Empire fought 3 wars in Afghanistan between 1839 and 1919. The First Anglo Afghan War saw a retreating British army routed and massacred by Afghans in the winter snows of the Hindu Kush in 1842, with 4,500 troops lost along with approximately 12,000 civilians. While the Second Anglo Afghan War went better for the British between 1878 and 1880, the Third Anglo Afghan War in 1919 saw the Central Asian nation win back its independence. When the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan at peak strength during the Cold War, they swiftly became bogged down against insurgent groups collectively known as the Mujahideen, who were receiving U.S. support. After suffering 14,453 military deaths and a further 53,753 soldiers wounded, the USSR withdrew from Afghanistan in defeat in 1989. So far, 2,348 U.S. troops have been killed in Operation Enduring Freedom, while another 20,000 have been wounded. A further 1,147 NATO troops also lost their lives there between 2001 and 2021. The fate of the Afghan government over the next few days will ultimately determine whether democracy survives or if the country returns to the better days of Taliban rule. Iran sits at the crossroads of the Islamic world. Linking the Middle East, the Caucasus and Central and South Asia, Iran has struggled to balance the benefits and risks of its geographic position. Iran's core is located in the western Zagros mountain range. From this secure geography, the beginnings of the Persian Empire spread throughout Iran's mountainous topography, securing the Albas, the southern Zagros and much of the Iranian plateau. Iran's primary geographic challenge has been to secure itself from the many external threats on its borders. Arabs, Mongols and Turks all conquered ancient Persia at various times, prompting Persia to expand its territorial control whenever possible to establish a buffer to protect its core. At its height, the Persian Empire stretched from the eastern Mediterranean to the Hindu Kush Mountains, bridging modern-day Europe and Asia. Echoes of this former empire can be seen even today, with Iran's support for Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Al-Assad regime in Damascus and the Shiite-led government in Iraq. Iran has also struggled to unite and control the various language and ethnic groups located within its core territories, a process impeded by the country's difficult terrain. Modern-day Iran is aided by its large hydrocarbon reserves. Iran boasts the fourth largest oil reserves and largest natural gas reserves in the world. The 20th century saw British, Russian and American interests competing not only to control Iran's strategic geographic location, but its significant energy reserves as well. This modern-day reliance on energy revenues has resulted in Iran's focus on securing the Strait of Hormuz and expanding control over the Persian Gulf to secure its core territories from the threat of outside invasion.